Man, I don't know why the whole three people that actually watch my fucking video want my opinion on this shit. How Gen Z became the poorest generation. I mean, inflation to an extent is natural, like, as like a country gets more wealthy and as like social programs such as like welfare expand, like there will be an increase in taxes, the value of the American dollar. There's also something that can be artificially inflated, say via printing money and shoving the market full of money. And you have situations where the experts will be like, "Oh no, look at this graph, and it shows that the economy's doing better than ever." But what's happening there is there was like a lot of like COVID stipends and money given to companies. I just took a drink. But for the American, everyday American person, like there, who was one locked in their house, but the bills kept coming in, and two, with the price of everything else going up, their wage may be raised for like I don't know, couple cents an hour. So though on the graph, America was doing better than ever. That was just companies and not the average American. And we reached this odd like situation where okay, companies will work their employees to 11, 12 hours to make up for the loss that happened, right? But the wages isn't increased, along with the fact that, and this is something I've always harped on. I guess, and I keep being told this is just a shit opinion, but a lot of companies, even on the entry level, demand at least two like maybe 2 or so years of work experience or like 2 years of college. And I'm like, well, that's not entry level. It's like, oh, but what if you need people with that experience? Well, okay, then just say you need people with that experience, but don't call it entry level. Like, that's the one thing I'd absolutely put on blast is the fact that entry level positions require 2 years of experience or two or effectively 2 years in college. And I'd be like, okay, well, if it requires those things, it's not entry level. Don't fucking put that. Like, if you're willing to train, don't be willing to train, but then be like, oh, well, you need to have this experience. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. And again, apparently, that's just a shit opinion, but enough of my 20 minutes before actually watching the video. Let's give it a watch.
Almost everywhere online, you'll notice videos, articles, and news clips talking about Gen Z becoming poorer, and we've even done so on this channel before too. But oftentimes, you'll see people say it's because Gen Z are lazy, entitled, and not having enough children or families.
But wasn't that the same thing said about millennials by the previous generation? Like, I feel like it's just this cycle where, oh, the generation comes after just doesn't want to work or doesn't want to do this, doesn't want, like, isn't that something that was said about, I guess I'm a millennial, like my generation? I mean, again, I don't care for the whole generation argument because it's people, we can't even agree. But I guess we agree who the fuck Gen Z is, but yeah, I mean, it's one of those things when no one wants to attack the issue, they just want to grandstand.
We see population collapse looming over the horizon as many warn about what's to come when there just aren't enough children to sustain the coming future. Is this all just because Generation Z supposedly wastes all their money on morning Starbucks and owning an iPhone? Well, it doesn't take long to realize that this is far from the truth, and is merely a band-aid type reasoning over the massive gaping wound causing Generation Z to become so much poorer than other generations. So are Generation Z, an entire generation of people around the West, just really that lazy if they physically can't work more than 12 hours a day to sustain a life? How is it that in the past you could really just get a job through an ad in the local paper on only a high school diploma, and by living off a regular normal salary you could have a big house, a stay-at-home wife, with 3 children, all sustained by just one salary at your normal job?
Yeah, I can't remember which show this was, but there was this guy who was like a shoe salesman, and he has like a, a 2-story house, 3 kids, and a stay-at-home wife. Like, I think that was like the quintessential American dream that anyone wants. Until, for ideological reasons, that became oppression. And now we live in an age where both the man and woman needs to work. But then we have welfare. And now, I guess maybe in some situations, the state becomes the father. Like, the role of the father has completely disappeared, and people will defend that. It's like, oh well, yes, this is the way it should be. It's like, yeah, there was a lot of negatives when my grandmother was alive, but there are a hell of a lot more positives, and there are workarounds, like active things you yourself could do, and you yourself could prepare for with your own ability. Now there's a lot of things completely just out of your control, and I feel like that's why people become like communists, because okay, they grew up in a system that adversely does not benefit them, and they blame capitalism, and they blame the system that they live in, but they have no really reference to any other type of system. All they know is, oh yeah, the system I'm in, it's not benefiting me. Why would I support this? And in some cases, it makes sense, even though, again, we can all see the same issue, but have come to 2 completely different conclusions.
What has led to this giant disparity in such a short time span where people can barely survive today, where the living conditions have become so much worse? Why does it appear that to live a normal life now is just so out of reach for most in Generation Z? And what effect will this have on the future? Well, to better understand this whole situation, we need to go back in time to compare the life of a regular person to someone today. In the past, for other generations, higher education was a sure way of moving upwards in the social structure. However, today, this is just becoming more and more of a financial black hole. College.
Yeah, higher education was also a hell of a lot cheaper. Like, I think there are colleges that were literally free, right? And there was, a need for people with higher, because there was a demand for people with higher education, because, and then maybe like the 1950s, like America was still effectively developing. Like, kind of reached the apex where we were kind of the world hegemon, but there was still wiggle room. So yeah, nowadays, like, people, like, I know teachers who will never, like, well, they won't pay off their student loan debt till the day they die. Like, they'll be paying that shit until their deathbed. And that's something that was like, wow, imagine being in debt for your entire life. Now, you're a teacher. Does that really, I mean, did that pay off? I don't know. It would depend on for me, it wouldn't. But I know teachers that like what they do and equally hate what they do. Like, it's both love and hate their job. I guess it's not always interesting. I know professors that do the same fucking, or are the same way. But yeah, It's like if you're farmed, literally, they literally spawn camp you the minute you come out of high school. And even the system itself tells you, oh, you need, like, college is successful, but at least here in the Midwest, it's an outdated, old system, right? Like, people will gladly work the truck driver job. They'll gladly be the sewage cleaner. Like, people will gladly work these jobs if they're given, the financial respect they deserve. So if you don't increase inflation, if you don't raise the cost of living on them, if you don't make lower their standard of living, like, people will gladly work these jobs. It's just now, is it really worth it? Now, I guess this generation that came after mine is saying, fuck no.
Tuition, which has doubled the amount that students will have to pay in the last 20 years, has completely exploded. If we count that with inflation, the tuition for public colleges in the US has jumped by more than 213% compared to the 1980s. Baby boomers would pay about $10,000 converted with inflation to 2018, but Generation Z now at the very minimum is paying $25,910. And more often than not, it's often well into the six-figure range, as this number also excludes rentals, administration fees, stationery, and food, which is why there's such crippling debt all over America for students right now. And even
Yeah, and that's a huge number. And every politician, it says, oh, like, well, student loan debt forgiveness, but no one wants to attack the reason student loan debt exists. No one wants to get to the root of the issue. They just want to hold it as sort of like a campaign thing. And there's also things, but scholarships is a perfect, system. It's like, as long as you keep your grades up, they will invest into you to go through college. And that's the thing about college, right? I think it is an amazing experience. Like, you learn in high school, even outside of the education itself, you learn to fucking deal with people that sometimes you probably just don't fucking want to. And then college teaches independence, right? It's like you are your own thing. And yeah, some people are sort of thrown into this position, but college just sort of weans you off of being, at your parents' house and gives you sort of a taste of the real life. And I mean, it was easy for me to adapt. Like, it was almost like second nature. But again, college, despite being good and a good experience, is too fucking expensive. And again, there's still the stigma that you need to go to college to be successful, even though there's been successful people that haven't gone to college. And again, what does successful mean? I mean, making a shit ton of money, owning businesses. I mean, again, people will gladly work lower paying jobs, lower educated jobs, if given respect.
even if you do get the best grades and scholarships possible, many Generation Z students are still required to take on these huge predatory loans that stay with you even if you go bankrupt. And so even when they make it outside of university, they now have a huge burden of loans hanging over them, restricting all of their financial decisions. And all of this for really what? Unless your degree is specifically needed for your line of work, getting a degree doesn't seem like a direct pathway to a good job anymore. It doesn't even guarantee entry-level jobs that can barely cover daily expenses, and universities are just becoming less and less of an option without enrolling in highly competitive career-focused courses. As Gen Z entered the workplace, it was a culture shock to be expected to do jobs that didn't suit their idea of what working would be, as now most companies need work experience, and if you're fresh out of college, this is almost impossible. I mean, despite abundant
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle. It's like, oh, well, you need the experience to get the job. Well, I need the fucking job to get the experience. And it's a cycle that no one wants to really break. Like, people will be like, yeah, that makes sense. And it's like, well, I suppose, but we're talking entry fucking level, right? I mean, a sales associate, I mean, maybe this would make sense. I mean, you're effectively representing goddamn Foot Locker. but I feel like this is just wait. This is probably just someone at the desk. Yeah, you shouldn't have to have a college fucking degree to do this. Like in and out. I mean,
Claims of job openings, finding work has become harder than ever. The news will always tell you that companies today are struggling to fill positions, and yet countless people in Generation Z specifically can never seem to find a job. Even
yeah, it's like they're struggling to fill positions, but they're always hiring. It's again we've reached this situation where they want higher educated people even for entry level jobs, and they're trying to kind of filter out, you know, maybe some of the people that absolutely fit the description but don't have as much, say, work experience or college experience as the next guy. So it's a ladder that just keeps raising, and like you're still at this point, right? But the ladder just keeps going further and further up.
if they send out dozens or even hundreds of applications without a single interview. Decades ago, this was never the case. Even during job shortages, getting hired was much simpler. Advice like dressing well and filling out your CV was often just enough. Even just asking for a manager's time often worked. Persistence led to success. But today, this approach is much harder. One major shift is the rising bar for entry. Before 2000, a college degree almost guaranteed you a good job. For other generations in the past, this was just a given. It was why you went to university. But for the first time ever, this isn't the case for Generation Z. Instead of companies competing for graduates, now a degree is the bare minimum for them. Employers now focus on the top few percent of candidates, while most roles require years of experience even for entry-level jobs.
You can also kind of blame the colleges for this. Like, there's a lot of degrees that, just don't really get you anywhere. Like, say, or it could, but you'll saturate the market. Like, say, there's just for reference, you have a college, very small one that has 500 people that, I don't know, is into like animal science or nursery or the type of jobs where you know, you deal with, pet health care, you know, why can't I? Veterinarians, right? Like, yeah, 500 veterinarians that enter the job place, but you can't integrate 500 of those veterinarians into like a single county because okay, one sprouts up a veterinary clinic, maybe hires the other 20, and now another one like sprouts up. It's like you split the business between those two veterinarian clinics, right? You split the market between them, and that's just you know the first 60 veterinarian. Like 500 needs to be integrated. Like unless they're willing to travel, you really can't do that. And again, there's a lot of these degrees that don't mean anything, like lesbian dance affiliate or whatever the fuck. That, like, you know, maybe we need one of those per state, but if like 1,000 of them exit colleges, it's like, what? I mean, where are we gonna put the ball?
The internet has also transformed hiring. In the past, companies recruited through local events, word of mouth, or physical job postings, limiting competition and making hiring even more personal. Today, a single online job listing can attract thousands of applicants instantly. With no need to apply in person, people send out applications en masse, creating a numbers-driven process that favors quantity over quality. This also mirrors trends in modern dating too for Generation Z, where technology has expanded competition, turning personal connections into data-driven interactions. Both industries now set higher standards due to the illusion of endless options, leading to dehumanizing experiences for individuals, and making it that much harder for Generation Z not only to create a family, but even have the money to support one. And then
Yeah, and comparing this to the dating industry, I guess a okay comparison. Like most dating was like, oh, your family knew another family, and they had a daughter or a son that wanted to be your daughter and son, and they're cool people. and they introduce you. Nowadays, it's like, yeah, you have an app that pretty much minimalizes it to, swipe left or swipe right. And yeah, I mean, it's this is a good comparison, even though it's two completely different things. It's like the problems are still the same, and like what he's probably going to talk about is a lot of like lower end jobs are being replaced by machines. You know, this might not be the case. And like, well, I guess I'll use Toyota as a reference, right? Because I work there. Like, most of our machines work alongside the individual. You can make a lot of money doing that job. The problem is it's literally just mundane work being done, for like 8 hours straight. Like not really 8 hours straight. Like you get some breaks between like vehicles and the line. But yeah, it's the same mundane. People don't really like mundane. I mean, it's fine, and you make a lot of money and get a lot of good benefits, but most people don't really want that.
Recent years, automation only made it that much harder. Application tracking systems, otherwise known as ATS, is used by nearly all major companies to filter candidates based on criteria like keywords, experience, or location. Originally designed for simpler tasks, these systems now reject applicants automatically for failing to match specific parameters. Many CVs are just discarded without ever being reviewed by a human. To stand out, applicants must tailor their CVs to each job posting, mimicking keywords and avoiding formatting issues that could confuse ATS software. This tedious process leaves many feeling demoralized, especially when rejection emails just become normal, and yet at the same time you see on social media all of these rich millionaires living it up in places like Dubai. Even with the widespread use of ATS, the hiring
And yeah, I mean, it is demoralizing if you get rejected for like the 20th time. Like, you're gonna like be like, well, why even try anymore? It's like 20, and again, it's even worse if you have like a 3, 4, 5 year job gap. Like it becomes even harder to find a job. It just compounds the issue. And I know a lot of places use social media presence, right? Because you can bullshit a resume easily. Like, it's not difficult, but you can't really bullshit, 4, 5, 6 years of Facebook interaction, which is why I say always have a Facebook account. Like, have one for the memes and anime and shit like that, and have one for, business, because it's a tool that will absolutely be, hand them the business one and you keep the meme one for yourself. I mean, this is just the situation we're living in nowadays. Like, you cannot get ahead without an online presence. Now, if you're fine where you're at, or if that's not required, you know, then whatever, disregard this information. But yeah, like if you want to get ahead, you need an online presence. And again, legitimately find things you're interested in. Like, I'm interested in like boxing before it became a clown show, and video games and anime, and well, I saved the gotcha games for the shitting around account because they're a little risk. The type that would make the Christian clutch their pearls. But yeah, I mean, it like if you're living in this system, like you have to find out what things will benefit you, and this is how people get ahead. They're like, okay, how do I benefit in this system? Well, an account for business and things I'm interested in, and another account for memes and real shit.
The process remains overwhelmed. AI is making these systems that much more sophisticated, allowing companies to further automate hiring while removing human judgment. This efficiency-driven approach reduces applicants to mere data points, stripping away opportunities for personal connections. The result is a hiring landscape that feels impersonal and unfair. While job hunting has always been challenging, the rise of automation heightened competition, and unrealistic standards have made it far more dehumanizing. Before, you were given an opportunity to have an interview face-to-face to at least give the employer a good impression. This is now only merited if you're selected for an interview at all. Data is the deciding factor amongst all, and any good explanations for any shortfalls in your CV fall through the cracks and are shifted to the rejected pile. There's even systems now that only pick up on certain words which might keep your application in the run, but again the competition is fierce. Even the format of your CV can count against you if their automated system is unable to read it. Then there's the problem with advertising jobs that are just no longer active. As per company policy, while they already have an applicant in mind, they still have to advertise. Or perhaps they fill the position but don't take the advert down. And if by
Yeah, and a lot of these, like, at least here in the Midwest, I mean, you can literally just roll up to the company and be like, hey, you have like a application. But I know in a lot of, like, you know, more developed states, shall we say, like, yeah, I mean, you need some level of online presence. You need some level of online activity and like an online, like a resume on the computer, sort of at the ready. I mean, I had one. I don't even know the password, but yeah, I mean, it is a very, like, in it being online and having effectively, like, I don't know if it, some of them probably do use AI, right? But having, the whole keyword filtering, I mean, if you get 2,000 applicants a month, I mean, it will be a little impossible to filter through all of them. So yeah, they will do the whole keyword thing, and it sucks, but to me that just sort of makes sense, right?
by chance you do get selected, you'll then be subjected to a questionnaire designed to gauge your submission to authority, as companies now want to hire people who will not challenge their expectations and restrictions. And if this couldn't get any worse for Generation Z, it seems like AI is looming in the distance to replace many jobs. And if it couldn't get any worse, Generation Z is one of the first generations to have been weakened on all fronts, bombarded with estrogenic chemicals from plastics, junk food, and sedentary lifestyles, making Generation Z one of the weakest, less energetic, and more easily controlled generations in history. But luckily, there is some hope, and that would be
I mean, I don't know, the generation before me had, like, what, asbestos? Like, my grandfather had lead in his blood. My father probably had asbestos in his balls. And I have microplastic in mine. I mean, every generation of men had some level of toxic chemical coursing through them. And it's almost like, the gamma radiation for the Hulk. It kept you going, except I guess the microplastics making your dick small. Why am I making this point? This is probably like an ad.
NMN, that's nicotinamide mononucleotide, a derivative of the B vitamin niacin, which is known to dramatically improve health and longevity by serving as a precursor to NAD+, a compound that plays a crucial role in energy reduction, muscle regeneration, metabolism, and gene expression in the body. NMN works by replenishing diminished NAD+ levels, which naturally fall at a rate of about...
Okay, I'm feeling like this is an ad. I feel like this is an ad. Hold on.
What is NM groups to defend us? And
20 years off you. It's like to change the status of NMM, but is aimed at cornering the market and taking the supplement away from you. A weaker population is after 8 hours, you can buy 2 and get 1 for free, so stock up now while you can. Wages have flatlined for the past 20 years. Of late, the average hourly earnings of employees in 2024 is the same as that of 1978, and that was during a bad economic down period. And so while living prices, real estate, just your normal expenses have shot through the roof, the income you receive really hasn't changed at all. This means there's far more restrictions in place that make it that much harder to live independently. And that's why today we're seeing more and more people in Generation Z living with their parents for as long as they can, not because they...
And to be fair, like, I think that's a good thing, right? Because there's this stigma about living with your parents and oh, you're living with your mother, but like Asians out earn both whites and blacks, and it's because they have a very strong family bond that is willing to pick them up when they're down. Because there's this idea that you need to be afraid of failing. I mean, you sort of like at one point you gotta admit, like, yeah, I mean, I will fail and I'll do it again. And it's always nice to have that base, but nowadays we don't really have that base. Like, I mean, I guess your parents will help you, but there's a lot of stigma with living in your mom's basement. I'm over here like my brother in Christ. A basement's expensive. You might as well have a motherfucker living down there paying rent. And again, if it was back in the 1950s where, you could afford a like a two-story house, I mean, yeah, it would make sense to have them rooms filled when you're, I guess, with your kids. But yeah, I mean, it's always that, American dream to move out and to get your own house and to get your own wife and kids and dog. But I feel like having that base is just helpful and only benefits.
They want to. In the year 2023, nearly 45% of American adults who are 18 to 29 years old are living with their parents, which is the highest rate ever since the 1940s. This used to be something that was completely foreign for people living in America, and now it's just becoming normal. In fact, in the UK, 1 in 3 males and 1 in 4 females in the 20 to 34 age group still live in their parental homes.
Yeah, I mean, again, I guess the reason is bad, but I don't really have a problem with the act. Like, if the shit is expensive, I mean, it only really makes sense. Like, wait, you want people to take out loans and be in debt? You have to pay the loan above other things. At the end of the day, that's kind of like taking out a mortgage is kind of something that has to happen, at least nowadays. I mean, unless your parents are willing to shoulder the burden to that. But that's not really a good situation either. I mean, a lot of things can happen with that, and it's between the parents and the kids. But I mean, yeah, and the fact that how it's becoming more and more expensive, even to live in an apartment. Like, this is why I moved out of my damn apartment, because it was like $600 a month, not including like electricity and all that. Like 600 for the apartment, then it jumped to 700, then it jumps to 800 a month, and I'm like, nah, I'm out this bitch. Peace. Too fucking expensive. Now I got my mortgage, and it's like 590 something a month. Like, just owning a house ended up just being cheaper now. In some situations, that's not the case. And especially nowadays with the expenses of property raising, that's not the case. But, I mean, having that resource should be fine, but I mean, whatever.
The cost of
I guess it's a cultural thing.
food on average was about $4,500 per year per person between the years 2000 and 2010 for millennials. But Gen Z is now looking at 22% more at about $5,500 per year per person.
Jeez.
So with all these financial problems set in place, with debt crippling Generation Z, it completely limits them in starting a life for themselves, pushing back the time that you get married and start a family of your own, just because you're still not even able to live independently at this point, as it's simply not affordable. And while 2 salaries in one household should at least sustain a couple just starting, it often doesn't because both incomes are so low and the options are so limited. Added onto this, the rising rental costs that we've...
Yeah, and it's a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, the market is, like, you could lose your job sometimes if, again, your job's either replaced by automation or if your job's just not really required because of AI. I mean, it's very volatile, right? Or maybe you're finding out like it's sometimes even to the point that you're working more hours than what it's worth. Like people are fine with working. It's just if the pay doesn't, reflect the price of everything else, it's like at one point you'll be like, well, is it really worth it?
We've all seen. It's clear to almost everyone now that housing affordability has dramatically changed over the years. In the 1970s, the average cost was about $23,000 for a home, which today, taking into account inflation, would be about $150,000. But today, homes now average at about $400,000. This is almost
Now, granted, there are a lot of like $1 million homes that inflate that, and there's also a lot of houses being bought up by like hedge funds. Like, I mean, I think before COVID, at least around here, the average was like 70, 80, 90K. But like the price of my house has just like has doubled in the past 4 years. Like I could pay off the mortgage I have now, and if I was to sell my house, I'd make double what it would cost. Now, granted, all the other properties have risen, so it'd be difficult to find another one at a reasonable price. But yeah, man, it has risen.
3 times as much. This is why baby boomers had almost no problems buying a house. In just a few years of having a job, they would easily be able to afford a home. It was extremely affordable to what they earned, living costs were reasonable, and homes were not really in demand.
Yeah, in a situation like this, yeah, I mean, you would move out and be like, yeah, I'm getting my own house. Like, yeah, like, that'd just be the reasonable thing to do. Because why would I bang my wife in my mom's house when they're all around? It makes no sense.
Making it a perfect market. They also had the exposure of a simpler time. They would help their parents fix their homes and get a better understanding of maintenance. And then by owning up all these homes, their net worth has exploded in recent years at the same time. But of course for people today, it's the exact opposite situation. Now the general rule of thumb has always been that you could eventually afford a house if the monthly payments were 30% of your monthly income. However, today this isn't really that possible. Most end up with 50%, leaving little money left to even survive. Owning a house also comes with insurance on the house and the responsibility of fixing anything that needs fixing, along with a bunch of taxes added on. And as the population exploded, so too did the demand for houses, making this a seller's market.
Yeah, and like for middle class, like every time your heat goes out or your car breaks down or someone gets sick or you get sick, you face an injury, like every single time this happens, like it's almost like a dagger to the heart. It's like, oh God, like my financials. And this is something that really only affects, like, it affects the middle class more because I guess if you're poor, right, like, they like if it's a medical issue, they cannot wring the money out of you. Like they cannot make you pay. Like I mean, I know a couple friends that never paid their medical bills. Like their parents when they were young never like they threw that fucking receipt in the trash. But it was like if you're rich, let's be fair, you probably have your own private insurance. So it doesn't really matter. Like things like these only really affect the middle class, and it affects them a lot. And it's surprising why no one even wants to discuss these things. Like no one wants to discuss the issues that affect the majority of Americans that are in the middle class. Because when I was growing up in high school, like if you're making 100K, like that was sort of like, yeah, I mean, you're not rich, but you're coasting by. And now I feel like that's like you're still like not like anywhere near poverty, but it's just not worth that much as it was, you know, 10 years ago.
Eliminating most normal people's options of buying a home until they're at least 50 years old, leaving them paying rental costs for someone else, or never having anything to show for it. Landlords know they can put up the price, and with so many potential occupants, they don't need to keep rental costs low. Even renting now comes with a list of add-on fees that most Gen Z just don't take into account, leading to people sharing homes in an attempt to afford them but still not making ends meet. And it's hardly a surprise. I mean, the average rent in places like New York alone is $4,000 a month.
And for renting a place for that much, I guess all that includes like utilities, but even then, that's a that's a lot. Like, how much of that you think is split between, you know, the internet, because we all need the internet, and the electricity and the place itself, and like, I don't know, maybe it's also like food and stuff, but even that, like, before COVID, like I said, I probably was paying like a third of that. Now, again, I left that apartment, God, and again, this is just singular me and the bumfuck of Indiana. But yeah, there's a lot of people with, again, families that they need to pay or feed and pay. And maybe some of them will be paying rent. Like that's a lot of fucking money, and just to rent. Because if you own a home, like, you build value in the house and equity. Here, like, it's just effectively just getting pissed away. And there are reasons to rent over owning a home, but again, if you have a stable job and if you intend to work that job for a long time, and, you know, a stable income, I mean, I guess unless it's difficult, like, you might as well sort of put some down payment into a house. Again, not a financial expert. Like, this is what I did. But I guess working out. But yeah.
And that's without the bills and water costs, meaning that a salary of
without bills and water. Okay, yeah, that's a fuck ton.
$100,000 in some cases isn't even enough to be sustainable. Now, as unreasonable as that sounds, it's a harsh new reality for many people in high cost of living cities in the US. And for the most part, Generation Z are feeling the brunt of this, starting at the bottom of the ladder with the most debt and the least amount of possibility to get paid so much. And with inflation on top of this, it almost feels like to be in Gen Z and build any real wealth, it's just a never-ending battle not to go into debt. In the last 2 years alone, inflation has severely reduced purchasing power. We have 86% less power compared to baby boomers. To pay for basic needs like groceries, gas, and utility bills, most have to choose often between saving more or discretionary spending. And while GDP figures and economic policies may show that the economy is improving, almost nobody's feeling it.
Yeah, again, this is what I mean. Like, the quote-unquote experts will always refer to this line and be like, yeah, the GDP's growing. But yeah, this is amongst, like, businesses because they're getting handed money from the government because of COVID and, you know, that economic downturn. I mean, there was an increase, right? And even in the crash that happened in the early 2000s, there was still a bit of an increase. But like, this absolutely was just USD being artificially pumped. Like, but the prices of everything's going up, but the average everyday American, you know, they're watching the prices increase with their own eyes, but they're wages maybe increased a little bit to compensate this, but not that much.
Things like quantitative easing, GDP growth is mostly enjoyed by the older generations with wealth that's invested in the stock market or real estate. But if it's so much harder to get into the job market, and with wages massively stagnating, along with huge student debt, it's no surprise that debt levels are rising at an unprecedented rate compared to previous generations. Between 2021 and 2023, Gen Z individuals aged 18 to 26 experienced a staggering 179% increase in their overall debt burden. This is the largest surge among all generation cohorts during that period. A substantial portion of this debt is attributed to student loans. As of 2022, 36% of older Generation Z people held student loan debt, with an average.
Yeah, and it's like a lot of these. I mean, I guess if you're 18, you're legally an adult, but again, you're being farmed the minute you leave high school into taking on debt for college for a degree that, I mean, maybe you'll find something into, but maybe you don't. And again, you're being told, oh, you just don't want to work, huh? You don't want to work by people who, again, grew up in a completely different economic system than we have now, that don't really even understand the system that we're living in now. But again, they don't have to because they probably only have their own. They already have a job, right? So, and again, it's like, do kids even like straight out of college? I didn't even really have financial understanding. My mindset was just pay as little as humanly fucking possible, because you know, a lot of the people I know did is like, okay, you can take $100, that like, well, 100,000 is a lot, but you can take like, 50,000 and pay it off, you know 25 years, but you can also take 70,000 and pay it off, in the next 40 years. And yeah, the dividend, the money you have to pay per month is lower, but you're paying it throughout a longer period of time. And then it's like, oh, well, you can get the 90,000. It's like, oh, I'll take the 90,000. I'm like, nigga, what? Why take on all that money that you probably won't really even need? It's like, again, I had a scholarship, so whatever, but it's like you're getting shoved so much money that helps in the short term, but in the long term, again, I know teachers that are paying that shit out, won't that will be paying their debts till the day they die. It's just, again, it's something that you effectively financially groomed into, and it just, we don't live in the same system that our parents grew up in. Like, things are too fucking expensive now, and I do think there is, again, there needs to be, this needs to be addressed, because it's not getting better. I mean, they're just farming even more.
Average balance of $20,000. In comparison, older millennials and those of the same age in 2006 had a lower incidence of student debt and a lower average balance, indicating that Generation Z might be shouldering a heavier financial burden earlier in their life, which is really hardly any surprise with all these factors mentioned, and it's why they're increasingly utilizing credit. By the end of 2023, 84%.
And again, not a financial expert, but my whole thing is there are certain situations like where you need to utilize credit, but again, if I can't pay it with my money, I don't need it. That's just my, like, maybe for like a vehicle, but credit is, again, it just seems like another additive thing, another additive cost and complication that I personally just don't care to have to deal with. Yeah, I think that's a good way to like how do I explain this? in a better way. It's like, say in Warframe, it's like you can pay, certain amount of, in-game currency and this secondary currency, or you can pay with this higher level of currency that's overinflated, but you have to farm a whole nother, and it's technically less, but you have to go through a whole nother type of farm to get this higher end currency. And maybe, yeah, you're there and maybe you're not. It's like, nah, I'll just pay with the regular and mid. Like, why would I complicate this system more than what needs to be complicated? Like, that's my mindset, but again, not an expert.
Of
I'm just can only really use what I do as reference.
credit active Gen Z consumers possess at least one general purpose credit card, a huge increase from the 61% of millennials at the same age a decade prior. And this comes with higher interest rates on these debts, suggesting that many in Generation Z are very much struggling to manage their debt obligations effectively. So with all this considered, when people say generation are just more lazy than other previous generations, there's a lot more to this than it first seems. It's not laziness to have a coffee and an iPhone, or to not care about your job if you can't even afford to survive. This isn't to do with laziness and apathy, but more so the fact that there's no reason to care anymore. It's why employee confidence, morale and birth rates are declining across the globe. And amongst everyone, Gen Z stands out with the lowest levels of worker engagement. Only 44% report job satisfaction compared to 67% of older workers, driving these trends you hear about in the news like quiet quitting and bare minimum Mondays. But this is more just a symptom of a much wider problem, of broader societal discontent and stagnation. And as this happens, so too are the fertility rates dropping. The US recently reached a historic low of 1.62 births per woman.
I might have already stated my opinion to this, but I mean, I feel like maybe to an extent they're related, but again, when countries are doing good and prospering, people just have less children, and maybe everything you previously discussed plays a factor, but I mean, I feel like this is just a wave that needs to be ridden. Like when countries as a whole are doing good, people just have less births. When they're doing bad, I mean, there's a lot like in the past, we didn't like there wasn't a thing like welfare, at least not in like first world nations. So you had kids, and they were your fucking welfare, and that's kind of your incentive to be a good parent, because maybe they come back and help you out, maybe they don't. And it's like your older brothers would, you know, raise the younger kids. But I mean, and they were different times. But again, like take throughout human history, the time we've had welfare in like this tiny, insignificant like line between now and maybe I don't know, past 50 years is like the time that we actually dabbled in welfare as a concept, and now it's implemented. Like this is a relatively new idea, and yeah, nowadays, like at least here in America, it seems to just be replacing the family unit. Just dump money into them, and I guess they have money, but and I mean I hate to agree with a communist, but Karl Marx was kind of correct when he said like because ideologies such as Christianity gave a lot of benefits that people like to throw away and pretend didn't happen because personally they had a bad experience. But like ideology gave a lot of people the tools and the means to interact with the world the way they do, and gave a lot of meaning and understanding that nowadays people just don't like. And again, you're not taught how the world is. Like, you're taught to be a factory worker, which is fine because you can work a factory, and even with everything that's going on, you can make a decent living. But people don't like critically think about these things or want to even have the critical discussion about these things, and it's like nothing really is going to be fixed if that doesn't happen.
Far below the 2.1 needed to sustain a stable population. And understanding these two interconnected trends reveals a much bigger generational and economic shift. The same sort of boring soulless corporate work no longer connects with Generation Z, especially when they can't even afford to live properly, causing 60%.
Yeah, and say in 2010, right? If you were paid $100,000 to work in a cubicle, brother, my ass would be the happiest fucking cubicle worker you've ever known. Pure, like, bar none. But nowadays, it's like you can barely even sustain yourself. And now, again, both, the man, the husband and wife needs to work. And it's like, okay, where are the kids? Well, I guess they're probably being raised by their grandmother. So you have absent parents most of the time. And it's just I think it's just a lot of these things that, like, a lot of things have happened down the trail that no one wants to address or even discuss. And now we've reached this point. And, above that, just living in good times. Yeah, I think that will attribute to the lowering in birth rates.
Of US bosses to report terminating Generation Z employees for valuing flexible schedules and higher pay. And it's the same thing all around the West. Younger workers in the UK also feel so disengaged, with over 40% under 25 considering leaving their jobs due to burnout and a lack of career progression, which aligns perfectly with the broader cultural shift away from traditional life milestones, including starting families and having children. And how can society expect Generation Z to be having large, happy families when the cost of raising a child is approximately $300,000 by age 17? And that's excluding college and inflation driving this figure higher. In the UK, childcare consumes over 20% of household income, making parenthood increasingly unattainable and only for the rich, however dystopian that may seem. High student debt, stagnant wages, and unaffordable housing all compounds to this challenge, not only discouraging job satisfaction but also having a family. It's why only back in 2003, 83% of people expressed a desire to become parents. But today, that number has now dropped down to 51%.
Yeah, and again, and this sucks, and this is one of those things where if you've worked these types of upper management and higher positions, you just have this level of knowledge about it that other people will just consider you a know-it-all and all that for saying. But, I mean, company doesn't want to hire a family man who has a nagging wife and kids at home, because what he's going to do is he's not going to work. He's going to work the bare minimum overtime, put in the bare minimum at work, because again it's effectively a second job at home. Like, and they're not going to hire a woman who's in the same situation, is becoming pregnant, having kids, right? Because she's not at work for a year, and the company itself has to pay, parent leave. I can't remember the term. Like, McDonald's will gladly gladly hire that single father who has to pay, alimony to the kids, and they'll gladly hire that single mother with 3 kids, to get spat on while she's working at McDonald's. Again, there's a lot of ideologies that defend this. They're like, people ideologically defend the single mother working 12 hours a day just to feed the kids because it's liberating, apparently. And it's like, okay, so a family that you work with, and again, along with the bad that will happen, and along with the good that will also happen, like, do you think this is better? And people are like, yes. It's like, well, yes, Oh, whatever, man. Whatever.
All of this is compounding to something much greater than just Generation Z. This isn't just about Generation Z being lazy or whatever that means. The economic impact of all of this is going to be significant. Fewer young people entering the workforce exacerbates labour shortages, already visible in aging societies like Japan, where nearly 30% of the population is over 65. This imbalance increases financial pressures on workers, inflates taxes, and reduces benefits, further destabilizing economies.
Let's be fair, right? We're comparing a couple of different countries that are completely different culturally and sit completely different places on, the world stage. I mean, if you're an American, you can easily grab a passport and go to, really whatever state you want where it's cheaper. Like, if it's expensive and, like, I don't know why I yawned and now I'm out of breath for some reason. I don't know. It's like if you're in New York and it's too expensive, like you can go to like Illinois where it's less expensive. Or hell, you could even go to other countries on the planet where it's inexpensive. Like if you have 20 USD and you're in Thailand, like you will not starve for that day. Like there's so many countries that gladly take the old freedom units. Like hell, you could probably take all the savings you have, go to a country, and as long as you learn the language and the culture and respect the culture, like you live there easily. I mean, a lot of people do this, like working abroad, or like doing college abroad. So to be fair, you are comparing different, but I see the point that's being made.
Businesses then face shrinking consumer bases and rising costs, slowing growth and threatening long-term stability. Efforts to reverse these declines, including family incentives and generous parental leave policies in nations like France, Japan, and Taiwan, have seen limited success. Cultural and systemic barriers persist, emphasizing that financial support alone can't resolve these issues, and Generation Z's emphasis on work-life balance, mental health, and flexibility has to be incorporated into policies and workplace strategies to foster greater engagement and address underlying challenges. Because if Generation Z are not making it on their own, how could they ever afford to support a family? It's hard enough without even having kids, which is a terrible tragedy. To support a home for a family, with our current home-to-income ratio being around 6 to 8 years, sometimes even 14 in other Western countries. But for baby boomers back in 1988, this ratio was only 4 years, and historically US home prices were around 5 times the yearly income. Today, the ratio has exceeded even the 2008 housing bubble, which is even worse in the UK, where home-to-income ratios have been over 7 for a decade and recently just hit 9. The situation is spiraling out of control. So then how will this affect our future? Could this really be the start of a population collapse? Well, you see, here's what the US looked like in 2023. Instead of a large population of kids waiting to replace the adults as they get older, the opposite is now true. Even though child mortality has fallen drastically, 50 years of falling birth rates have done their damage, and there's now far more middle-aged and elderly people than children. So what's this chart going to look like in another 20 years?
Yeah, and again, like it's a system where like in social security, like when you're 80 years old and pissing on yourself, like you pray you have that backing, of the government to pay your retirement. Like you're like, God forbid this happens. Like this isn't something that I'm anywhere near thinking about, but it's one of those things that yeah, but it's a system where people need to pay into it in order for people to benefit from it. And when you're old and fucking shitting in your diaper, old person diaper, like you'd want to effectively get paid for. I mean, it's sort of is the way it is, and it's like, how would that look like? And then I mean, I don't fucking know. And like, well, what's going to happen? Well, again, what's going to happen is people are going to just start addressing this, and hopefully when we're past the whole people just don't want to work crap that, you know, people say but doesn't mean anything. They just say it because the people around them say it, and it's one of those things that are just, it's like, you know, an idea that's contagious but doesn't address the issue. Like when we're past that point and we can actually have the discussion, like people are gonna be like, yeah, why the fuck is this shit even more expensive than it was with my parents? Like people understand, again, I understand a level of, you know, natural inflation because, again, wealthy country, but to this extent it is ridiculous.
While we can pretty accurately predict the shape of that chart, the reality we're all going to be living in will be a lot more shocking. Aging populations and population decline present a massive problem for societies, but we don't need to imagine what these problems will be, as we can already see it today. It's now predicted that over 20 developed nations will see their populations halve before 2100. The overall historical effects of this will be the same as with the plague. Sure, our grandchildren or even our great-grandchildren can enjoy the benefits, but for us, we're going to have to deal with the immediate fallout of demographic collapse. It means we'll likely see governments try to squeeze all the work they can out of their people to deal with the scarcity.
Oh yeah, and yeah, like 15-hour work days, like what the fuck?
Corporations and governments will push for Korean-style working conditions and hours if they think they can get away with it. 18-hour work days all day every week. And it's something everyone's going to have to fight back against if we want to prevent this. Now, every generation has undoubtedly gone through hardships far worse than what we see today. Men being conscripted to fight in the trenches for years, never-ending wars, never moving anywhere. Plagues, rations, Great Depressions, war.
Yeah, man, unfortunately, like, you know, in the past, this is how you dealt with, you know, a large population of uneducated swine. You just sent your uneducated swine to kill the other people's uneducated swine. And, I mean, that kind of solved that issue. But, I mean, we live in completely different times now. I mean, we like to believe.
Make anyone of the past scoff at any of our struggles today. But no issue recently has been so existential to the progression of humanity as this. It's why no matter what, you'll see those in the top of governments and corporations frantically worrying about the coming population collapse.
People are below the replacement rate in all 50 states of the US, even Mormon, Utah. The average woman has less than 2 kids. Iran is...
Yeah, but they blame porn, which is like... So you're banning... Like, so you're blaming the coping mechanism of this instead of the issue. It's like you can just magically force someone to just bang and have kids by taking away vices. Like, human beings don't act that way. Like, if you remove one vice, they'll just move to another, probably more worse vice. Like, we need to actually address the issue. But I don't know. It's porn. It's the anime titties. Fuck me, right?
It's below that. Italy, way below it. South Korea.
Japan's in
yeah, but it's all these like
yeah.
It's all these very different types of societies.
And yet to truly address this, we have to look at the root causes, most of which is coming from these exact issues, making Generation Z that much poorer today relative to any other time in modern history.
Wait, that's the end of. He kind of like abruptly. Okay, yeah, that's the end of it. But yeah, I mean, this is a good video. And, I mean, again, what's the solution? Again, I think it's just a wave that you need to ride. I mean, I don't think there is a solution to this. I mean, it's already coming. Labor isn't cheap enough. We need women to work to make it cheaper. Labor isn't cheap enough. We need illegal immigrants to make it cheaper. Labor isn't cheap enough. We need AI to make it cheaper. Hey, why is every excessive generation poorer than the boomers? Yeah. I mean, This is the company mindset. Again, it's this need to that companies have to min-max the employee as opposed to, treat them with respect. I remember a great internet comment saying that being born Gen Z was like starting a Monopoly game 20 turns later than everyone. Yeah. Yeah. Man. Forgot to mention BlackRock buying up homes, paying premiums to force renting. Yeah, this is what I talk about. Like a lot of like hedge funds buy up property and sit on it. Features like a cyberpunk dystopian without all the neat cyberpunk stuff. Yeah, I can't make my fucking cock longer. Have like a prehensile cock, like a monkey tail, like a metal fucking dick. Man, I hate this. Fuck this. Boomers ate the whole pizza, Gen Z ate the crust, millennials ate the crumbs, and Gen Z are just Gen X. I think we're the Gen X. I think that okay. Millennials ate the crumbs. Gen Z are just there looking somebody's fingers. Yeah, having a degree doesn't really matter anymore. All companies want now is experience, but they aren't willing to give you that experience. Yeah, again, they're not willing to train for the job because they're min-max to deal with people that vertically or that horizontally moves up the company chain as opposed to vertically. And yeah, there's quite a bit of vertical movement, but it's not much. Again, because they're trying to min-max. And if your company doesn't do it, other companies will and have better employees than you, so it just makes sense. They're all broke because they buy Starbucks, yells the father/grandfather who used to spend hundreds at a bar after every shift. Yeah, and then get drunk and beat wife. Hey, the best times. Too broke to even have an addiction. Yeah. Like, I can't even have a fucking video game or porn addiction. Fuck. Just to cope. God damn it. Don't forget all the unpaid internships that never lead to a job. Yeah, or all like the temp jobs. Like, that'd be the first thing. Like, again, I think hiring is just this risk that should exist. Like, I don't know. Like, I know there are all these risks to, like, again, unpaid internships and temp work that don't really lead anywhere. Well, more power for all the relatives who keep asking you, why aren't you getting a job? Haven't you bought a house? Why aren't you married yet? I mean, to be fair, I haven't really been asked if I have a job in a house. I mean, I'm not married. You have 3 jobs, living with your parents, paying slowly student loans, don't have time for dating, being alone all the time, boomers, lazy. Yep. Rejection letter becomes normal. Wait, you got a rejection letter? I just get silence. Yeah. Imagine when they actually had to write out that rejection letter. At this point, a full rebellion is coming. I don't know. I mean, again, how people think is okay. The system's against me, and I always used oppressive systems like communism as sort of the benchmark. It's like, okay, how people and families think is, what do I do to get ahead in this system? It's like, okay, if the teacher's corrupt, well, I'll just pay the teacher to pass my child. Or if the cop's corrupt, I'll just pay the cop to look the other way. I mean, I feel like people will just try to min-max the best they can, and that those who do it the best will come ahead of those who don't. But it is something you kind of got to do. Well, but I mean, anyway, good video. since I'm actually signed in. But that's all I gotta say about this. Peace.